I only needed somewhere to sleep. But this place seemed to know my family.
She was 23 and homeless. No bakery, no apartment, no family bed waiting, just a canvas coin purse and $9 she had counted beneath a bus station light. And with that $9, she bought an abandoned cast-iron waffle iron foundry outside South Pittsburg, Marion County, Tennessee, a place erased from county work maps in 1971. Half the roof had folded into the casting room. The old cupola furnace was split down one side. Marion County had condemned it on October 14th, 1998, and scheduled demolition for the following spring. But beneath the false bottom of a pine pattern maker's box sat a sealed wooden compartment unopened for decades, holding money, iron-working knowledge, and one carved sunflower that would alter the shape of Willa's life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Willa Mae Mercer had been measuring her whole life without knowing it. As a child in eastern Tennessee, she measured flour with chipped cups, rainwater by the marks it left on porch posts, and trouble by how softly adults closed doors. She could look at a warped shelf and know which corner had dropped. At 11, she repaired a loose oven handle with a washer cut from a coffee tin because nobody in the house had money for the proper part. Her mother, Elaine, believed survival meant keeping your head down and never owing anyone gratitude you could not repay. She worked hotel laundry until her wrists swelled, folded every towel with military corners, and kept grocery receipts in envelopes marked by month. Love in Elaine's house was rarely spoken. It was a clean shirt left over a chair before dawn. The person who understood Willa differently was her grandfather, Amos Mercer. Amos had spent 41 years around grey iron, first as a moulder and later as a pattern repairman, and every second Saturday he took Willa into a narrow shed behind his house where the air smelled of linseed oil, scorched wood, and old metal filings. He showed her how a wooden pattern had to be smoother than the casting it hoped to make, because every flaw pressed into sand returned in iron. They sharpened gouges on an oil stone, patched worn edges with maple, and traced rosettes from antique waffle plates onto scrap pine. He never let her hurry. When she was 13, he placed 2 halves of a rusted waffle iron on the bench and made her fit the hinge 3 times before allowing the pin to stay. He meant metal, joints, money, promises, and people. Willa did not understand all of it then. She understood enough to remember. Amos died during a wet March when she was 17. By the time relatives cleared his rented house, the shed had been emptied into 3 pickup trucks. His wooden patterns disappeared. So did his moulding tools, notebooks, oilstone, and a blackened ledger. Willa had once seen him guard from rain beneath his coat. She received 1 photograph and a tobacco tin containing 4 bent screws. 6 years later, that loss seemed almost gentle. The bakery had been Maren Pike's idea. Maren wore cream-coloured coats even in bad weather and carried a silver mechanical pencil that clicked softly whenever someone disagreed with her. She had known Willa since community college and spoke about partnership as though she were offering shelter. Willa would handle recipes, equipment, early mornings and production. Maren would handle leases, banking, vendors and paperwork. "Let me carry the numbers," she often said. The numbers were where she hid the knife. Maren brought loan papers into the bakery during closing hours, placing adhesive flags beside signature lines while the mixers still ticked as they cooled. She said the forms merely consolidated equipment financing. Willa signed where the flags told her to sign. 3 weeks later, Maren vanished. The account was empty. The loans were not. On August 26th, 2021, 2 men from a repossession company taped a notice across the bakery door while Willa stood on the sidewalk holding the only thing they had allowed her to remove, Amos's old tobacco tin. A creditor's representative pointed toward the notice. "You signed every page. Miss Mercer. It stands 8 words. She went to her mother's apartment before dark. Elaine opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. Behind her, the TV flickered blue against the wall. Willa could see the narrow couch where she had slept after Amos died. Her mother looked at the canvas bag over Willa's shoulder, then at the legal envelope in her hand. No accusation passed between them. Elaine lowered her eyes. Then she closed the door. The deadbolt turned slowly enough for Willa to hear each piece of metal settle. For 6 weeks, Willa moved south with less money every few days. She slept first in the Knoxville bus terminal until security stopped allowing overnight passengers without tickets. In Chattanooga, she spent 2 nights sitting upright in a 24-hour laundromat, feeding 1 quarter into a dryer whenever the attendant looked toward her. She washed in public library sinks and learned which grocery stores discounted bread after 8. $11 became 7. 7 became $4.86 after a bus ride to Jasper. She spent 99 cents on crackers and saved the packet of salt. One night she slept beneath a picnic shelter near the Tennessee River, using newspapers under her coat because cold came upward through concrete faster than she expected. Another night outside Kimball, a church custodian found her behind the fellowship hall and left a wool blanket on the steps without asking her name. She carried that blanket afterward. By the 6th week, everything Willa owned fit inside 1 canvas bag, 2 shirts, a toothbrush, Amos's tobacco tin, the blanket, and $9 in mixed bills and coins that she refused to spend until hunger became more dangerous than pride. Rain drove her into the South Pittsburg Public Library on an October afternoon. She chose a table near the radiator, not the books. Someone had left the local classified circular folded beside a stack of tax forms. Willa opened it because the paper was free. Near the bottom of a county property notice, between an estate sale and an advertisement for used fencing, she found 6 lines printed in type so small she had to bend toward the window. Abandoned industrial parcel. Former small foundry. Structure unsafe. ASIS. Quitclaim. $9 plus recording. Inquire Marion County Clerk. She read it 3 times. The price looked like an error. At the reference desk, she borrowed a county road map and found the parcel beyond the older edge of South Pittsburg, where rail sidings, foundry lots, and walnut-covered slopes crowded the valley beneath the Cumberland Plateau. $9. That was exactly what remained in her purse. Willa folded the classified square into quarters and placed it inside Amos's tobacco tin. Then she walked to the bus station, studied the departure board, and discovered she could get most of the way there without spending the $9 at all if she used the transfer voucher still tucked inside her old ticket sleeve. By sunset, she was riding toward a condemned foundry no sensible person wanted. She did not yet know that someone there had been waiting for a Mercer. The bus carried Willa west through the last pale hour of daylight, then turned south where the Cumberland Plateau broke into dark shoulders above the highway. Her transfer voucher took her only as far as Jasper. From there, she walked. The road towards South Pittsburg was a little more than 10 miles by the route she followed, though distance changed after midnight when every rise seemed to hide another rise behind it. Her canvas bag rubbed the same place on her shoulder until the skin burned. Near New Hope, a farmer let her sleep in the corner of an open hay barn after finding her beneath the eaves. The temperature fell to 37 degrees before dawn. She woke with straw in her hair and frost silvering the pasture fence. By 9, she could see South Pittsburg below her. The town did not look like a place built around iron until she noticed how often iron appeared. Old rail spurs crossed weeds behind brick warehouses. Cast drain covers sat heavy in the sidewalks. Chimneys rose beyond rooftops where furnaces had once worked day and night. She passed the Dixie Freeze with its faded sign, Kirkpatrick's Grocery, a narrow storefront called Mountain Mart Hardware, the Princess Theatre with dark poster frames, and the Corner Cafe, where bacon smoke escaped through a roof vent and followed her halfway down the block. Willa did not go inside anywhere. She had $9. The Marion County Clerk's office occupied rooms where footsteps carried sharply across tile. At the counter sat a woman with silver hair clipped close behind one ear and a tortoiseshell eyeglass chain looped around her neck. M.R.S. Evelyn Rutherford. Willa placed the folded classified notice on the counter. Mrs. Rutherford read it, then looked at Willa's clothes, the canvas bag, and the wool blanket rolled beneath its straps. You understand this is not a house. You understand there is no power, no certified water, and no insurance carrier we know of who will touch it. You understand $9 buys the parcel as it stands, including every defect the county has already warned you about. Mrs. Rutherford kept looking at her. Willa waited. Finally, the clerk opened a drawer and removed a thin file tied with cotton tape. The deed took 12 minutes. Willa signed Willa Mae Mercer in 3 places while Mrs. Rutherford watched the letters form. Then the clerk set a brass embossing stamp over the paper and pressed down with both hands. The seal made a dry, decisive crunch. County Road out past the old hosiery warehouse, she said. Take Highway 72 east, then turn north on Cedar Avenue before the tracks. At the split, keep left onto Old Foundry Road. You will see a gravel lane after the abandoned water tower. Walnut trees on both sides. Willa slid $9 beneath the glass. Mrs. Rutherford counted it once. Then she stopped. Mercer. Willa looked up. The clerk had $1 bill pinched between 2 fingers. Mrs. Rutherford lowered the bill. For the first time, her official expression changed. Amos Mercer worked iron. Willa said nothing. He was at Lodge for a time, the clerk continued. But before that, he learned pattern work from an old man east of town, Orville Bell. That name mean anything? Willa shook her head. Mrs. Rutherford turned in her chair and pulled a ledger from the shelf behind her. Its spine had been repaired with brown cloth tape. She opened it near the middle. There used to be 6 little foundries around this valley that never had proper company names. Men cast stove parts, skillets, sad irons, waffle irons, whatever the local trade needed. The parcel you bought belonged to Bell and Mercer Foundry Works for 17 years. Willa leaned closer. The clerk touched the line with one fingernail. Silas Mercer. The name was unfamiliar. Relation. Mrs. Rutherford studied her face again. Amos came here once after the county took the property for taxes. 1998, maybe 99. Asked whether anybody had opened the pattern room. Willa felt the edge of the counter beneath her fingers. Mrs. Rutherford closed the ledger carefully. He stood right where you are standing, looked at the tax amount, and said he would come back. She untied the parcel file. For a moment, the sounds in the office seemed very far away. A telephone ringing in another room, paper moving beneath a ceiling fan, someone coughing behind a closed door. Mrs. Rutherford put 8 of Willa's dollars into the cash drawer. The 9th remained on the counter. The clerk slipped $1 from her own purse into the drawer instead. Then she placed Willa's worn bill beneath the blotter on her desk. Outside, the afternoon had warmed into the low 50s. Willa followed the directions on foot. Old Foundry Road narrowed beyond the tracks. patched asphalt giving way to gravel along the shoulder. A man in denim overalls was repairing a mailbox beside a white house. He watched her pass without speaking. A yellow hound rose from beneath his porch. "Stay, Roscoe." The dog remained where it was, though its nose followed Willa. Past the house, the road bent beneath walnut trees whose bare branches crossed overhead like black wire. Nuts cracked beneath her shoes. A rusted water tower appeared through vines, its ladder ending 6 feet above the ground. Then she saw the lane. Grass had nearly swallowed it. At the end stood the Foundry. The building was larger than she had imagined from the notice, perhaps 32 feet wide and nearly 60 feet long, built of soot-darkened brick below and weathered timber above. A corrugated metal roof sagged over the western half where rafters had failed. One brick chimney leaned slightly but remained standing. Ivy entered through a broken window. Over the double doors hung a wooden sign. Only 4 letters remained readable beneath the peeling paint. Willa stopped. Wind moved through the walnut leaves behind her. She walked closer and touched the final visible letter. The wood was soft at the edge but sound toward the centre. The right-hand door had dropped on its hinges. She lifted it with her shoulder, pushed, and heard rust release in small flakes around the latch. The smell came first. Wet brick, old soot, mouse nests. Then something deeper, still faintly mineral and oily after all those years. A smell Willa knew before she could name it. Foundry sand. Inside, the front room held a cracked desk, 3 broken chairs, and a cast-iron stove with its door missing. Light came through holes in the roof and lay in narrow white columns across the floor. Dust moved inside them. Her shoe touched something metallic. A waffle iron. It lay open on the floor, both round plates orange with rust, a raised rosette barely visible beneath the corrosion. She lifted one handle. The hinge still moved, 1 inch, no farther. Somewhere in the building, water fell at slow intervals into metal. Ping. Silence. Ping. She followed the sound into the rear room. There the ceiling rose higher above an old casting floor. A small furnace stood against the east wall. Its cupola shell cracked vertically and blackened like a tree hit by lightning. Broken sand flasks leaned beneath a bench. A pouring shank lay twisted near the wall. Willa brushed her fingers over the bench. Fine grit clung to her skin. She tasted dust when she breathed through her mouth. Near the back wall, a window had lost all its glass, and cold air entered freely, carrying the smell of walnut leaves and creek water. Through it she could hear a freight train somewhere beyond town, wheels beating a slow rhythm against the rails. She found an old hand pump outside before dark. No water came. The outhouse leaned but stood. That was enough information for one day. Willa returned to the front room, swept a rectangle of floor with a bundle of dried weeds, and spread the church custodian's wool blanket beneath the one section of roof that looked intact. For supper she ate 6 crackers. She saved 4. Night entered the Foundry without resistance. The temperature dropped quickly, and every exposed nail seemed to collect cold. Willa put on both shirts, folded one end of the blanket over her legs, and used the canvas bag as a pillow. Above her, something small moved through the rafters. She did not sleep at first. She listened, to wind pressing against loose metal, to the occasional click of cooling iron, to the old building shifting under its own weight. Then, sometime after midnight, she heard a different sound from the back room. A soft wooden knock. Once, then again. Not an animal, not metal. Wood touching wood. Willa opened her eyes in the darkness. She did not get up. She simply lay there, listening to the condemned foundry breathe around her, while somewhere beyond the wall an unseen object moved less than an inch and settled back into place. Pressure from both sides will bake your character through. By daylight, the sound from the back room had an ordinary explanation. A warped cabinet door hung from one leather hinge beside the casting bench. Wind entering through the broken window lifted it just far enough for the lower corner to tap the frame. Willa tied it shut with twine. Then she began learning what $9 had bought. For 3 days she did almost nothing that could be called restoration. She cleared a path to the well and lowered a rusted nut, tied to string until it struck water 23 feet down. The hand pump would not prime, but the well itself was alive. She boiled every bucket over a small outdoor fire. The outhouse needed its roof braced before she trusted it. Inside the foundry, she learned the floor by sound. A hollow creak near the front wall meant a rotten sleeper underneath. A sharp complaint beside the furnace meant one loose plank. Not failure. The broad boards beneath the pattern bench gave a low, solid groan. Those she trusted. On the 4th morning she walked back into town. Mountain Mart hardware smelled of kerosene, fertilizer, cedar shavings, and the coffee somebody had forgotten on a hot plate near the register. Hundreds of small drawers lined one wall, each labelled in pencil. The owner was a broad man named Walter Kincaid, with one eyebrow permanently singed shorter than the other. Walter considered that. She placed a short list on the counter. That I heard, Willa stood still while he read. Walter rubbed the singed eyebrow with one finger. That is a very polished way to say none. He opened a ledger, 30-day account. You miss 30 days. You come tell me why before I come looking. I will. He wrote Mercer Works across the top of a page. Then he reached beneath the counter and handed her a grease-marked paperback called Home Repairs for Farm and Workshop. I cannot. You can read, can't you? She bought only what the building needed first, a chimney brush for $4.75, 50 feet of 3/8 inch rope for $2.10, a used steel bucket for $1.25, 2 pounds of stove cement for 1.80 cents, a wire hand brush for 95 cents, and a box of long masonry matches for 30 cents. Walter wrote every amount in the ledger. No interest. No speech about charity. That afternoon Willa climbed onto the roof with the rope around her waist and learned why chimney sweeps earned money. The flue was blocked 12 feet down. She tied the round brush beneath an old iron sash weight, lowered it from the chimney top, and worked it up and down in short strokes rather than forcing it. At first, nothing moved. Then the obstruction broke. A column of black dust fell through the flue. Willa heard it hit below like dry grain. She climbed down, shoveled out the soot, then repeated the process. The second pass released hard flakes of glazed creosote, some as thick as a quarter. She scraped what she could reach from the lower clean-out with a bent fireplace poker, vacuuming nothing because there was no electricity. Only sweeping, bagging, and sweeping again. 6 hours passed. Her palms blistered beneath borrowed work gloves. By dusk she had removed nearly 2 buckets of soot, bird nesting, and creosote. She held a mirror at the clean-out and angled sunlight down from above. A pale circle appeared. Open. The next morning she inspected every visible brick around the stove connection before making fire. Where mortar had fallen away, she packed stove cement only into the small interior gaps that could be temporarily sealed. She did not pretend the chimney was repaired. She only made it safe enough for one test. 3 twists of newspaper, 6 dry walnut sticks. 2 pieces of split oak Walter had thrown into her arms as she left the store. Willa struck a match. The paper caught reluctantly. Then flame climbed. Smoke rose straight into the flue. None entered the room. She stood with both hands extended toward the stove, watching heat awaken iron that had been cold for years. For her first hot meal in the foundry, she boiled water in the steel bucket, set a dented tin cup inside it as a makeshift double boiler, and warmed a can of beans Walter had slipped into the hardware sack. She ate them with crackers. Steam touched her face. That was enough to make the room feel inhabited. Only after the chimney drew clean did Willa turn seriously toward the workroom. She worked from left to right. First came 3 wooden sand flasks, their corners worn smooth by hands, then a row of long-handled moulding spoons, each shaped differently for repairing edges in packed sand. A cracked cast-iron crucible sat beneath the bench, too small for the cupola but useful for test melts. Beside it lay 2 waffle iron plates. Picture this one patterned with diamonds, the other with a ring of oak leaves. She found a hand riddle for screening moulding sand, a rusted sprue cutter, a box of hinge pins wrapped in oilcloth, and a half-burned notebook whose outer pages had fused black from heat. Most important was the pattern maker's chest. It stood under the rear bench where the floor remained driest. Pine, 30 inches long, iron corner straps. Its lid had swollen shut. Willa worked a thin putty knife around the rim until the wood released with a sigh. Inside lay wooden patterns nested in shavings. Rounds, handles, hinge bosses, a pair of waffle plates carved in mirror image. She lifted each one with both hands. Patterns were not finished objects. They were promises of empty space, pressed into specially prepared sand and removed carefully. They left behind the shape molten iron would occupy. Amos had taught her that never damage the promise. At the bottom lay a broad cedar disc carved with a simple cross-hatched waffle grid. Willa lifted it. Something knocked beneath the box, not inside the disc. Below it, she set the pattern down and tapped the chest floor with one knuckle. Tock. She moved 3 inches. Tock. Near the rear left corner, the sound changed. Took. She stopped. Willa tapped again. Took. Hollow. She emptied the chest completely and tested its weight by lifting one end. Too heavy. Even allowing for the iron straps and thick pine, it was wrong by perhaps 20 pounds. She measured the outside depth, then the inside. There was a difference of nearly 3 inches. Willa sat back on her heels. The false bottom had no obvious seam. She brushed years of dust from the corners with the hardware store paintbrush Walter had added without charging her. Along the rear wall, beneath a strip of cedar edging, she found 2 wooden pins darker than the surrounding pine. No nails, no screws, pins. She pressed the first. Nothing. The second moved inward less than 1/8 of an inch. A section of the bottom lifted. Not by much. Enough. Willa slid the putty knife beneath it and raised the false floor carefully until she could get her fingers under the edge. The panel came free. Beneath it was a shallow compartment lined with oilcloth. 3 packages rested inside. She did not touch them immediately. She closed the workshop door, checked the front door, then returned. The first package was wrapped in waxed cloth and tied with linen cord. Inside lay pattern-making tools. 2 small carving gouges, a veinner, a narrow shoulder plane, a brass divider. Each had been wiped with oil before storage. The wooden handle of the smallest gouge bore a burned letter, M. Willa placed it on the bench. The second bundle was heavier. Inside were raw materials, brass hinge stock, 3 unfinished iron pins, graphite powder sealed in a glass jar, and 2 blocks of close-grained maple suitable for carving small patterns. Beneath them lay the sunflower. It was a wooden pattern no larger than a dinner plate. Each petal had been carved in shallow relief. Across the centre, between rows of tiny seed marks, someone had cut a sentence by hand. Pressure from both sides will bake your character through. Willa read it once, then turned the pattern over. No signature. The third package was a tin document box. Its latch resisted. She cleaned the hinge first, added 1 drop of oil from the tool bundle, and worked it slowly until the lid opened without tearing anything inside. There was money. Not 1 stack. Many. Paper currency wrapped in bands brittle with age. Canvas coin rolls. Small envelopes labelled in pencil. A velvet pouch. And 1 sealed letter lying on top. Willa did not open the letter. She began with the money because numbers were safer. She carried everything to the front desk and counted beneath the strongest window. First, the paper bills. Older notes mixed with newer deposits, suggesting someone had added to the cash over many years. Then the coins. Morgan, silver dollars. Walking Liberty $half. Mercury dimes. Indian head cents. She recorded each group on the back of an old county notice. The velvet pouch contained something heavier than coins. A military medal. A purple heart. On the reverse was an engraved name she could barely read beneath tarnish. Willa Mae Mercer. A folded slip identified the year. 1944. Willa set the medal apart. Then she counted again. And again. The total did not change. $38,100. $38,100. For several minutes she remained seated. Not because she was imagining what to buy. Because the number did not belong beside the cracked desk, the leaking roof, the 6 remaining crackers, or the credit ledger at Mountain Mart Hardware. It seemed like a clerical mistake made by the dead. She checked beneath every bundle for a second note. There was only 1 letter. Its envelope had browned along the edges. Across the front, in careful handwriting, were 4 words. For whoever comes next. Willa recognized something in the shape of the capital W. Not the writer. The hand. She had seen the same disciplined curves in labels Amos once made for tool drawers. Outside, evening had begun. She could have opened the envelope then. Instead, she returned every coin and bill to the tin box, except the purple heart, which she wrapped separately in clean cloth. She placed the letter on top. Then she carried a chair through the back door. Beyond the walnut trees, water moved along the creek in a narrow band of reflected sky. Willa sat until she could no longer see individual stones beneath the surface. $38,100 waited inside. So did a dead soldier's medal. So did a letter written by someone who had expected a stranger. She did not touch any of them again that night. The creek kept moving through the dark as though nothing had been found. Pressure from both sides will bake your character through. At first light, Willa carried the tin box to the front room and set it beside the stove. She warmed her hands before touching the envelope. The handwriting bothered her more in daylight. The capital M leaned forward exactly as Amos's had. The small E crossed low. Whoever had written it had learned letters from the same hand. or Amos had learned from theirs. She broke the seal with the tip of the smallest pattern maker's gouge. The paper unfolded into 4 thin pages. My dear one, whoever you are, if you're reading this, then you found the false flaw, which means you were patient enough not to split a good box merely because it resisted you. That is already something in your favour. My name is Clara Bell Mercer. In May of 1971, Dr. Samuel Harlan at Erlanger Hospital in Chattanooga told me I had pancreatic cancer, and perhaps 6 months if my body behaved kindly. I have never trusted bodies to obey schedules, but I trust written instructions, so I'm leaving these while my hand is steady. The work here began with Josiah Bell, my grandfather, who came from Wheeling, West Virginia in 1879, and made stove fittings before he learned patterned cookware. His daughter Ruth Bell, born in 1862, kept the books and cut finer wood patterns than either of her brothers. Ruth's son, Silas Mercer, was born in 1881 near Bridgeport, Alabama, and opened this small works with her in 1906. I, Clara, was born here in 1908 and learned moulding before I was tall enough to lift a flask alone. 4 generations, if you count honestly, because Ruth's hands belonged to the trade whether the sign admitted it or not. Bell Mercer poured its last commercial iron on October 3, 1939. After that came more than 30 years of silence. My husband, Thomas Mercer, was killed in France in 1944 while serving with the United States Army. Elias, his younger brother, was wounded the same year. The purple heart in this box was his. Return it to honour if you can. Keep it safe if you cannot. Now the useful part. For small waffle plates, use clean grey iron and pour near 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, but never trust heat by colour alone once daylight fades. For green moulding sand, begin near 8 parts sharp silica sand to 1 part fire clay, adding water by handfuls until a squeezed lump breaks clean instead of smearing. Dust the wooden pattern lightly with graphite before ramming. Pack the drag firm at the edges and gentler over the fine carving, or you will lose detail when the pattern lifts. When the casting is cold enough to handle, do not quench it. Let iron finish becoming itself. For seasoning, warm the cleaned plate slowly. Wipe on the thinnest possible coat of flaxseed oil. Then heat it until the smoke has nearly stopped. Cool completely. Repeat 6 times. Thick oil becomes gum. Thin oil becomes a skin. The money is not treasure. It is wages that were never taken, sale money saved through lean years, and insurance left after death. Use what the work requires. Do not let money persuade you to hurry. Inheritance is not owning what another person kept. It is knowing how to continue the task without wasting what their hands learned. There is a sunflower pattern beneath this letter. Read the words carved into it when work presses you from both sides. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You're a welcome here. Clara Bell Mercer. July 18th, 1971. Willa read the letter twice. The second time. She stopped at Ruth Bell, then at Silas, then at Clara's instruction about the thin oil. When she finished, she aligned the pages on the desk and folded them along the original creases, pressing each fold with the side of her thumb rather than making a new one. She did not cry. She took the letter outside, behind the foundry, beyond the broken window and a stand of young walnut trees. She found what Clara had described in a sentence Willa had almost overlooked, a marker set low near the creek. It was not a grave. A rectangular limestone block rose 6 inches from the soil, moss covering one side. Willa scraped it gently with a twig. Below the date was a symbol, a sunflower inside a circle, the same flower carved into the wooden pattern. Willa sat beside the marker until cold travelled through her trousers. Then she returned inside and opened Amos's tobacco tin. The 4 bent screws remained where they had been for 6 years. She chose one. On the stove she heated its rusted end until it was too warm to hold, then touched it to a shallow cup containing a drop of Clara's old seasoning oil. The oil whispered. A thin curl of smoke rose. For one brief second, the foundry smelled exactly like Amos's shed on Saturdays. Hot iron. Oil. Wood dust. Willa closed her eyes. Then she set the screw down before memory could ask for more than the room could give. That afternoon, kindness arrived in pieces too small to refuse without insulting the giver. Walter Kincaid sent a sack containing 2 dry oak splits and wrote nothing out across the paper in carpenter's pencil. The farmer near New Hope who had given Willa a hay barn corner appeared with a jar of well water because he had heard her pump was dead. Mrs. Rutherford sent an old county plat folded around a note marking the original foundry boundary. And someone from the corner cafe left a paper bag on the doorstep containing a biscuit, an apple, and 2 boiled eggs. No name. Only a grease spot spreading slowly through the bottom. Perhaps you remember a kindness like that. Not the grand rescue people tell stories about, but one small thing given when you had no graceful way to ask for it. A ride. A meal. A coat. A door held open longer than necessary. What was yours? Willa ate 1 egg and half the biscuit. She saved the rest for morning. Before sleeping, she carried the sunflower pattern, Clara's letter, the brass divider, and Amos's tobacco tin to her place beside the stove. She arranged them within reach of her blanket. Then she lay down among the tools of people she had never met and one man she had loved, listening as the cooling stove ticked softly in the dark. The first snow came on December 3. 4 inches gathered over the walnut roots and softened the broken roofline until the foundry looked. From the road, almost whole, Willa knew better. She read the roofing chapter in Walter's repair manual 3 times before climbing the ladder. The west slope measured 28 feet long by 16 feet from ridge to eave. Allowing for overlap and waste, she calculated 11 bundles of asphalt shingles, 2 rolls of 15-pound felt, and 12 pounds of galvanized roofing nails. Walter looked at the figures. He added the materials to her ledger. Then he disappeared into the back room and returned carrying a roofing hatchet with a square pole and a scarred leather grip. Willa did not reach for it. He died 12 years ago, Walter said. Hatchet didn't. She took it. The man who taught her to use it was Horace Pike, a 71-year-old former roofer who appeared on the second morning wearing canvas suspenders and a cap bleached nearly white by decades of sun. Good. I charged too much. He refused every later offer. They worked 11 days. First, they removed the collapsed sheets and cut back rotten wood until the remaining rafters were sound. One split rafter received a sister board bolted alongside it. Horace snapped a chalk line across the new sheathing and taught Willa to set each nail in 3 strokes, 1 to place, 1 to drive, 1 to seat. Not 4. Not 12. 3. On the 5th day, he crouched beside her row. Willa reached for the hammer. She did. By December 15th, the last ridge cap lay straight beneath a sky the colour of pewter. That night rain struck the new roof. Willa sat on the floor with a lantern and listened. Nothing dripped. For the first time since arriving, she did not place buckets before sleeping. Cold exposed the chimney's real condition. Several bricks near the roofline had spalled so badly their faces came away beneath Willa's fingers. Mortar inside the attic had turned to powder. She removed only what had failed. Walter found hydraulic lime in the back of his warehouse, and Horace showed her how to mix repair mortar with 3 parts sharp sand to 1 part hydraulic lime around the hottest interior joints, She used a separate fireclay mortar, roughly 1 part fireclay to 2 parts fine sand, mixed stiff enough to hold on a pointing trowel. January stayed cruelly steady. Most mornings began in the 20s. Willa worked bare-handed whenever setting mortar because gloves dulled her sense of pressure. Every 15 minutes her fingertips went numb, and she climbed down to warm them around the stove before returning. She rebuilt the worst courses slowly, 1 brick out, 1 cleaned bed, 1 dampened joint, 1 brick back. 3 weeks passed that way. She repaired the flashing where the roof met masonry and packed the crown only after the upper courses had set. On January 28th, Horace stood outside while Willa built a small test fire. She fed it dry oak gradually. The flue warmed. Smoke rose from the chimney in a narrow grey column, then cleared. Inside, not a trace came through the joints. Horace looked up once. Willa added 1 more stick. That was celebration enough. The floors were not beautiful beneath the grime. They were better. White pine. Wide planks, some more than 14 inches across, fastened with hand-cut rosehead nails whose dark heads had sunk slightly below the grain. Willa removed no board that could still carry weight. She reset loose nails by hand and patched 2 damaged edges with salvaged pine from an interior partition. Walter rented her a random orbit sander for $14 a day. She planned one day. It took 3. The first pass at 80 grit removed soot, old wax, and the grey surface fibres raised by years of damp. At 120 grit, the grain began to show. The final 220 grit pass left the boards smooth without erasing the small dents and saw marks that proved their age. Dust entered everything. Her hair, her sleeves, the corners of her mouth. She wiped the floor twice with barely damp cloths and waited overnight. Then came oil. 3 thin coats, each rubbed along the grain. 48 hours of cure after the final coat. The wood changed slowly from exhausted dark honey toward a deep mahogany brown where generations of feet had compressed the pine hardest. There was one morning when Willa did none of it. She woke before sunrise, put on her work clothes, and sat outside with the sander still waiting in its case. A great blue heron stood in the marsh beyond the creek. For nearly an hour it did not move. Neither did she. The bird finally opened its wings and crossed the water with 3 slow beats. Willa remained on the step until noon. No floor was sanded that day. No disaster followed. The next morning, she went back to work. There were 8 windows. 3 had no glass at all. 4 held panes cracked from corner to corner. The 8th contained 1 original pane, thin and uneven, dated by an old inventory notation to 1788 and reused in the Foundry when the building was expanded. Willa preserved it. The glass bent reflected light into small waves, making the walnut trees outside appear to breathe when the viewer moved. For replacement panes, Walter ordered cut glass by measurement. Willa removed the old glazing points, scraped loose compound without gouging the sash, primed bare wood, and warmed DAP 33 glazing putty between her palms until it rolled cleanly beneath her thumbs. She pressed a thin bedding layer into the rabbet. Glass next. Glazing points. Then the outer bevel, drawn smooth with a putty knife held at the same angle from corner to corner. The sash cords were worse than the glass. Several had rotted inside their weight pockets. She replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton sash cord, feeding each line over the pulley and securing it to the counterweight with a compact figure-8 knot. The first sash jammed. She removed it. Planned 1 swollen edge. Rehung it. It moved. By the 7th window. Her cuts had become cleaner and her putty lines straighter. She saved the 1788 pane for last. Willa cleaned it only with warm water and a soft cloth. No scraper touched the surface. She reset the sash cord, balanced the old counterweights, and lowered the window carefully into place. Outside, the walnut branches were still bare. A chickadee landed on one of them while she tested the sash. The bird tipped its black-capped head toward the glass. Willa raised the window, lowered it, raised it again. Smooth. She rested both palms on the sill and watched the chickadee remain there for several seconds before it lifted into the February air. The wall beside the chimney failed 3 times. The original surface was horsehair plaster over hand-split oak lath, and Willa's first patch dried too quickly and cracked from corner to corner. The second pulled loose because she had not dampened the old edges enough. The third held overnight, then dropped onto the floor before breakfast. Walter brought her an old paper sack from his warehouse. "Horsehair," he said. "My father saved everything." Willa mixed lime plaster and worked the fibres through it by hand. This time she built the wall in 3 stages. A scored scratch coat pressed through the oak lath. A 3/8 inch brown coat. Left 72 hours before she touched it again. Then a finish coat, no thicker than 1/8 inch. She feathered the edges into the old wall rather than hiding the repair. When it cured, the patches remained visible in changing light. Willa ran her palm over them. She did not need them to look new. By March, people had stopped calling the place condemned. They called it Mercer Works. Doris Bell from the corner cafe began leaving paper bags on the doorstep every Tuesday. She was a compact woman with flour permanently caught in the creases beside her fingernails. Biscuits. Soup in a jar. Sometimes pie wrapped in wax paper. The first time Willa followed her back to the cafe with coins, Doris refused to open the register. In candles when the shop reopens, that was all she would accept. A week later, a boy named Caleb Turner arrived on a blue Schwinn bicycle with a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, red-haired, and wore 1 boot with black tape around the toe. He shrugged. My mother said, "About your grandfather." He did not explain further. For 2 hours he split wind-fallen walnut and oak into stove lengths, stacked them beneath the repaired eave, drank water from a jelly jar, and pedalled home before dark. Reverend Boyd was different. He never entered unless invited. Each morning on his walk, he passed the Foundry wearing the same dark hat, tipped its brim toward Willa, and continued along Old Foundry Road. One cold morning she found him standing beside the gate. He looked at the roof, the straight chimney smoke, and the new glass. Then he bowed his head. 4 words. After that, he tipped his hat and kept walking. Willa postponed the cellar until February 11th. The hatch beneath the rear bench had swollen shut, and when it finally opened, 7 granite steps descended into darkness. The room below measured roughly 12 by 15 feet. Its floor was fieldstone packed tight with lime dust. At the centre lay one dressed granite slab, unlike every other stone in the room. Carved into it was the sunflower mark. Willa swept the edges clean. She did not lift it. Clara had written nothing about a stone beneath the cellar, and Willa had learned that curiosity was not the same as permission. Under the 3rd granite step, her fingers touched wood. A small oak box had been wedged behind the riser. Inside lay a brass key. Its bow had been cut into the shape of a sunflower. Beneath it was a tintype. The photograph showed a young woman standing outside the same building in summer clothes, bone hand resting on a long moulding tool. Her face stopped Willa's breath. The brow, the narrow chin, the slight unevenness of the eyes. It was almost her own face. On the back, written in faded ink, Ruth Bell, daughter of Josiah Bell, age 25, summer of 1903. Willa carried the key upstairs. She placed it on the mantel beside Clara's letter. She did not know what it opened. By late March, the snow retreated into shaded ditches. The creek grew loud with meltwater. Walnut catkins hung green from branches that had looked dead a month earlier. Willa cleaned one moulding flask and repaired 2 small hand tools, but she did not begin full foundry work. Not yet. She would spend 1 coin from the cash on materials and practice first on small samples. No commercial pour. No promises. She carved test patterns in scrap maple, mixed sand in shallow trays, and learned again how much pressure an edge could take before it broke. The building had waited through decades of silence. A few more months would not harm it. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Willa finished her first complete waffle iron. It was not copied from any surviving commercial design. She carved the wooden pattern herself from seasoned maple, using Clara's brass divider to establish the circles and Amos's smallest gouge to cut the flour. Sunflower petals spread across both cooking faces. The mould took 3 attempts. The first lost detail near the hinge boss. The second tore when she lifted the pattern too quickly. On the third, the green sand released cleanly. The iron was poured at a working foundry nearby, whose owner allowed Willa to use a small section of floor after hours. She stood behind a face shield as grey iron entered the mould near 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The metal disappeared beneath the sand. Nothing theatrical happened. That was the beauty of it. Hours later, she broke the mould. The sunflower was there. Back at Mercer Works, she ground the gates carefully, fitted the 2 plates, drilled the hinge, and set a riveted pin so both halves opened evenly. Then she followed Clara's seasoning instructions. Thin flaxseed oil. Heat. Smoke nearly gone. Cool completely. 6 times. On the first morning she cooked with it, Willa poured a modest spoonful of batter onto the lower plate, closed the iron, and turned it over the stove. The waffle released without tearing. She ate it standing at the bench. The restored interior had changed without becoming polished. The white pine floors still showed old dents. The repaired plaster revealed its patches. 8 windows admitted clear winter light, while the wavering 1788 pane bent the walnut trees into soft curves. The pattern chest remained under the rear bench. Clara's letter stayed in an archival sleeve inside it. The sunflower key still waited on the mantel. Willa discovered what it opened because of Caleb. He had come one November morning to trim a dead branch from the largest walnut beside the old pattern yard. Halfway up, he called down. Willa climbed the ladder. Set into the trunk, almost swallowed by bark, was a small brass plate stamped with the sunflower mark. The key fit. Behind the plate was a narrow cavity lined with tin. Inside lay a folded 48-star American flag, dry despite the decades, and a note dated June 12th, 1944. It was written by Ruth Bell. Thomas had gone to war. Elias had gone too. Ruth wrote that she had hidden the flag before receiving any telegram because she could not bear to see it folded over a coffin. She wrote that women were running moulding floors, machine shops, farms, and households while sons crossed oceans. A trade survives when somebody keeps the tools ready for hands not yet born. The flag had never covered a coffin. Thomas died in France months later. Ruth never opened the cavity again. On November 11th, Willa carried Elias Mercer's Purple Heart to Chattanooga National Cemetery. She did not donate it to a display case. She brought it to the grave of Elias Mercer, whose burial record Walter had helped her locate, and stood there on Veterans Day while rain darkened the stone. The medal remained with the family afterward. But once each year, she carried it back. The money changed very little. That surprised people who eventually learnt there had been money at all. Willa used 3 Morgan silver dollars and 2 Walking Liberty $half from the cash. 1 coin paid for maple. 1 helped cover specialty moulding sand. 2 went toward hinge stock and graphite. The 5th paid a machinist to correct a drilling jig she could not make accurately herself. Everything else remained sealed, not hidden in the old false floor, protected, documented, Clara's original amount, each withdrawal, each receipt. On the first page of a new ledger, Willa wrote, "For the next one." Mercer Works did not reopen with a ceremony. There was no newspaper photographer. Doris pinned an index card to the corkboard inside the corner cafe. Hand-finished cast iron waffle irons. Small botches. Mercer Works. Ask Doris. The first month brought 4 names, then 9. By the next winter, more than 40 people had written their addresses on the mailing list. Willa made only what she could make correctly. Sometimes that meant 1 iron in a month, sometimes none. No customer was promised a date until the casting passed inspection. Walter approved of that. Caleb returned the following spring, carrying a long pine board wrapped in an army blanket. He was taller by then. The black tape was gone from his boot. He set the board across Willa's bench. The carving was rough in places but careful. Mercer Works. The letters followed the ghost marks of the original sign. Below them, in smaller type, he had carved. Willa stared at the last word. "I do not have daughters." Caleb rubbed sawdust from his sleeve. Neither did the sign. Willa understood. Ruth Bell's hands had belonged to the trade even when the old company name had refused to say so. Clara's had too. The board was not predicting children. It was correcting the past. They hung it above the restored doors. That autumn, Willa began a letter. She used cream paper. Not because it looked old, but because Walter had a box left from a stationery order nobody wanted. She wrote slowly, "My dear one, whoever you are." Then she stopped. There was no diagnosis to report. No war telegram. No reason to pretend she knew who would read it. So she wrote about work. She wrote that a wooden pattern must release cleanly from sand. That thick seasoning oil becomes gum. That a cracked wall deserves investigation before decoration. That $9 can be either almost nothing or the exact cost of a door. She recorded the names of people who had helped without making speeches. Evelyn Rutherford, Walter Kincaid, Horace Pike, Doris Bell, Caleb Turner, Reverend Boyd. She wrote that inherited tools should be used carefully, not worshipped. She wrote that money should never persuade the next person to hurry. At the bottom she left space for dates that had not happened yet. Years later, someone else could add to it. On a cold evening, Willa carried the unfinished letter outside and stood beside the 1906 marker. The creek moved beneath bare walnut branches. Behind her, through the restored windows, the foundry glowed with ordinary lamplight. A waffle iron cooled on the bench. A pattern waited for sanding. A repair ledger lay open. Nothing was complete. That mattered. Pressure from both sides will bake your character through. Willa returned inside before frost settled. She hung her coat beside the door, checked the stove damper, and placed the unfinished letter inside the pattern maker's box, not beneath the false bottom, on top, where the next careful person would find it. Years earlier, the building had been called unsafe, forgotten, obsolete, and worth less than the paperwork required to transfer it. Now smoke rose from the chimney when work was being done. Some weeks there was no smoke at all. Both conditions were honest. Mercer Works waits. It has always waited. In the Marion County Clerk's office, Mrs. Evelyn Rutherford eventually retired. On her last afternoon, she emptied 2 drawers, bundled old rubber bands, and threw away 19 dried pens. At the bottom of the desk, beneath the same worn blotter, she found a $1 bill. The paper was soft at the folds. She remembered exactly whose it was. Mrs. Rutherford did not spend it. She placed it in an envelope. Across the front she wrote one word, Mercer. Then she slid it into the back of the county ledger where Bell and Mercer Foundry Works had first been recorded. The drawer closed. The $1 remained,